Hello, my name is Alexander D Ohemeng. I'm a head of an evangelical convention in Ghana and an executive member of the Christian Council Ghana. I'm a pastor by vocation. I must say I'm glad to have been part of the Live Theology and World Christianity Certificate Program for 2025-2026 of OMSC of the Princeton Theological Seminary. With the Accra Hub at the Sunny Institute in Ghana, I'm a Tier 3 participant, and I am honored to have Dr. Matthew Crable as my supervisor and coordinator of the hub. The title of my study or research is the implication of Suyenhunu for Christian discipleship in Ghana, a Live Theological Inquiry. My chapter 1 basically has to do with introduction. It is still not complete till the work is complete. But this research seeks to recover Christian discipleship in the 21st century, at least within the Ghanaian context. It is explored through the notion of lived theology, and this is considered as an extension of lived religion, seeking to cultivate, as Dr. Austin Law says, a balanced sense of theological perspective that discerns and articulates the social particularities of how God is at work within an indigenous community. By that, I must say, faith is given a living expression, not necessarily at its best or worst, but as embodied within a specific local context and interpreted through its cultural lenses. This study adopted the Ghanaian concept of Suyenhunu, that is learning without impact or lasting impact as a contextual lens for examining a phenomenon of increasing theological knowledge without corresponding ethical and social transformation. The research problem. It was primarily observed that despite significant growth in Ghanaian Christianity, that is, church membership continues to increase, religious activities remains vibrant, yet societal transformation appears limited. Discipleship often seems secondary to church activities. I must say, from my observation, intentional discipleship often seems secondary to church activity. The key question had to do with looking at gaps between belief and societal impact or practice of our faith. So basically the key question looks at how might the indigenous concept of Suyenhunu help us identify gaps in Ghanaian discipleship. Of course, in looking forward in contributing to an improved contextual prescription of a more transformative model of Christian discipleship. To address this question, I adopted a qualitatively theological approach. My chapter 2 basically looks at some global discipleship, some information, some discourse on global discipleship, some African theology and Ghanaian context. I don't think it is exhaustive enough, but looking at the timeline, I believe I had enough to go ahead with the other aspects of the chapters and to also come up with some findings. So chapter 3 looks at the methodological framework of the research. So the research paradigm looked at interpretive, and the approach was more like looked at the qualitative research. The design was a lived theological inquiry. Why? Because the study seeks to understand the lived experiences of discipleship in the Ghanaian context, theological meanings, cultural interpretations, and discipleship practices. It is not exhaustive enough, but that's what the study seeks to do, rather than statistical trends. So the study investigates discipleship as lived reality rather than merely doctrinal theory, data collection and analysis. Participants were selected through purposeful selection of church leaders of the Christian Council of Ghana. This council is made up of about 30 heads of churches. It's a different. There are not different councils, but this is just one of the councils, and the interview is still ongoing. But at the moment, I have gathered four, which seems to have given me a saturated data to use to go ahead with what I'm presenting. We have those I was able to interview have been in ministry between 20 to 37 years. 20 to 37 years. The method was a semi-structured interview. And I used the OSMA approach to guide what I did. Analysis. The analysis was a two-stage process. Stage one looked at Ohemeng analysis, and that helps with understanding participants' own meaning of the topic at hand or the title of discipleship. The stage two looks at the theological interpretation, interpreting findings guided through Richard Osman's approach. Basically, he looks at what is happening as a descriptive lived theology, looks at why it is happening, considering an interpretive African theology, what ought to be happening, the normative and scriptural consistency, and how might the church respond, looking at pragmatic incorporation or contextual theology. This framework allows the study to move from empirical observation to theological interpretation and practical recommendations. Outcomes. I basically had 8 major themes emerging. I don't know whether the other interviews may bring more, but those that I have now had 8 major themes emerging. So chapter 4 will look at the major findings. Basically, I would just want to list the findings. So there was discipleship as an intentional formation as one of the findings, as a need, Christ-centered discipleship, character transformation, family-centered discipleship, contextual and cultural engagement, deficiency in current discipleship models, societal transformation and leadership, renewal through spiritual empowerment. Observation. Participants consistently identify a gap between church activity and transformational discipleship. Some significant finding. One, it was observed that there was discipleship deficit. Participants argue that churches conducted many activities. Discipleship is often assumed. Intentional formation is frequently neglected. One of the feedback that stood out in the interview, one person in the interview said, "We are doing a lot of activities, but discipleship. The challenge is not the absence of Christianity, but the absence of intentional disciple formation." That's one of the things that stood out. Significant finding 2, family and leadership formation. Participants emphasize that family as the first discipleship environment, leadership integrity, and spiritual formation before public ministry. One participant stated, "Our first church should be the family." One implication, authentic discipleship begins before church programs. Significant finding 3, culture as a resource. Participants argued that culture should not be rejected wholesale. Indigenous wisdom can enrich discipleship. Concepts such as Suyenhunu provide contextual language for Christian formation. In my interpretation, contextualization is not compromise or should not be to compromise faith. Rather, it should be a faithful translation of biblical truth into local realities. My chapter 5 will look at the Suyenhunu discipleship model. The finding led to the development of a contextual discipleship framework in 6 dimensions: Christ-centered identity, self-knowledge and moral awareness, family and relational formation, cultural discernment, spiritual empowerment and multiplication that must lead to a societal transformation. The central insight is that Suyenhunu provides a culturally meaningful lens through which discipleship can be understood diagnosed, and practiced. A visual model of my finding will be Christ at the center of discipleship, as the foundation of all discipleship. Self-awareness, it must lead to a self-awareness and wisdom in our practice of discipleship. It must connect to a family and relational formation, a cultural discernment, and then we can trust in a societal transformation and increasing spiritual empowerment, and in the end, disciple multiplication. The key principle of how to avoid or increasingly overcome the Suyenhunu phenomena was that Christ essentially should remain central. Suyenhunu as a cultural lens functions as a contextual interpretative framework rather than a replacement for biblical discipleship. The movement in the conceptual framework will be in the nature of our knowledge of Christ, relational discipleship practice, affirmative spiritual formation, ethical living in Christ-likeness, and the resultant social impact. Suyenhunu represents a breakdown between such stages, or the connection between such movements. Contribution of the study. I observed there was a theoretical contribution. It extends African practical theology by integrating indigenous wisdom and discipleship. There was also an ecclesia contribution. It provides churches with a contextual model of disciple making. And then missional contribution. Connect discipleship with social transformation. You could also say there was educational contribution. It offers theological institution a framework for intentional discipleship formation. My conclusion: the central argument of the study demonstrates that Christian discipleship in Ghana requires renewal. Current models often emphasizes activities over formation. Indigenous wisdom tradition possesses significant theological value that should not be ignored, and Suyenhunu provides a culturally resonant framework for discipleship. When integrated with biblical discipleship, it can contribute to both personal transformation and societal impact. Christian discipleship becomes most transformative when the gospel is not merely translated into local languages. Though incorporation and contextualization is being encouraged in lived theology, it becomes most transformative when the gospel is not merely translated into local languages, but embodied through culturally intelligible frameworks that form Christ-like persons capable of transforming society. One of the most significant insights from this research is that the challenge facing the church in Ghana is not primarily one of numerical growth, but of transformational depth. The voices of the participants repeatedly pointed to intentional discipleship as God's heartbeat for the church. What emerged from the study is that Suyenhunu understood as wisdom, self-awareness, prudence, and responsible living provides a culturally meaningful framework through which Christ-centered discipleship may be reimagined. The future of Christian witness in Ghana may therefore depend not only on how many converts the church makes, but on how effectively it forms disciples whose lives influences families, churches, institutions, and society for the glory of God. How is such a contextualized study or research relevant to world Christianity or the global church? Well, I will put it in the context of something Dr. Matthew Crable iterated, that Christianity in any indigenous community is not meant to be lived in isolation. The Great Commission is a call to a local church to grow into a global church through shared faith, shared concerns, notwithstanding different cultural lenses in lived theology. Thank you. The Twi language will say Medasi. God bless you. I will say the work is still ongoing. It's not complete, but so far this is what I have for the research. Thank you all. God bless you.